Someone asked a woman a simple question. What do you like to do for fun? She froze, not because she didn't have an answer somewhere in her, because she reached for it and found nothing there. I'm your host, Susie Rains, and you're listening to Health Over Wealth in the U.S., the podcast that helps Americans find cash-based, client-centered care outside the traditional insurance system. Today's episode is about a pattern a lot of women in the United States know intimately, even if they've never had a name for it. People-pleasing. Not the polite kind. The kind where you genuinely stop knowing what you want. This episode comes from Sandy Bartlett, a shamanic practitioner based in Arizona who works specifically with midlife women on this exact pattern through a practice called soul retrieval. Let's start with what soul retrieval actually is, because it's probably not what you think. In shamanic tradition, the idea is simple. In moments of trauma, overwhelm, or prolonged fear, a part of a person can split off and stay behind as a way of protecting itself. It's not gone, it's tucked away, waiting. Soul retrieval is the practice of calling that part back so a person can feel whole in their own life again. And if you're picturing something distant or foreign, Sandy addresses that directly. Most people who haven't encountered this work assume shamanism belongs to a different time or a different culture, something indigenous, something not really available to them. This isn't about borrowing a tradition. It's about recognizing that a part of you left and that it can come back. I'm going to share my personal experience with soul retrieval. I've personally worked with Sandy. I was a medic in the Army and spent a year in Iraq. A lot happened overseas. A lot happened in a war zone. Trauma was what I treated. There was a piece of me that stayed there when I came home. And I was home 20 years before I brought that piece of me back. Sandy was the key help in bringing that piece of me back so that I could see life from a whole perspective. This is what the practice is. Finding where your soul split off in protection and bringing it back to whole. Now here's where it gets specific to people-pleasing. For a lot of midlife women, that part didn't leave all at once. It left the way it did for Sandy, one accommodation at a time, until people-pleasing became the whole personality. It usually starts early. Maybe it was a parent who needed you smaller to feel safer. Maybe it was a classroom where being too much got you mocked. Maybe it was a relationship that rewarded your compliance with just enough warmth to keep you managing yourself. You learn to pause before you speak, to scan, to calculate whether this version of you is going to cost you something. And slowly that pausing becomes automatic. By midlife, that trained response has usually had decades to settle in. Through marriages, motherhood, careers, relationships that all rewarded you for staying easy to be around. It doesn't announce itself. It just becomes how you live. So how do you know if this is you? You don't need a diagnosis or dramatic story. Sandy names the signs, and they're usually quieter than people expect. Someone asks you what you want, and you genuinely don't know. You say yes when every part of you meant no. You feel resentful in relationships you chose, and you can't explain why. You're praised for being easy or low maintenance, and it doesn't feel like a compliment. You're exhausted in a way that rest doesn't fix. Here's the part I think matters most. Why can't you just decide to stop? Sandy's answer is that you can't logic your way out of a pattern that was never really about logic. The part of you that knows how to want things, say no, and take up space wasn't just suppressed, It's split off to keep you safe. Willpower asks the managed, edited version of you to just behave differently. Soul retrieval works from somewhere else entirely. It calls the missing part home, so the shift doesn't come from forcing yourself to be different. It comes from being whole enough that the old pattern no longer fits. Sandy also makes an important distinction here. Soul retrieval is not the same thing as therapy. It is a spiritual and energetic practice, not a form of clinical treatment, and many women use it alongside therapy rather than instead of. And like most cash-based, client-centered care, it's paid directly and isn't billed through insurance, which is the exact kind of practitioner that this show exists to help you find. Practitioners like Sandy are searchable right now at how.healthcare. If this episode is resonating, Sandy's own first step for women who want to go deeper is her community, Journey to Self, The Awakening, a space where she shares more about shamanic practice and how women actually move through this pattern. The link is in the show notes. As for my experience, coming from a traumatic war zone, how people-pleasing fit into that pattern was when I came home, I didn't want to talk about my experience. I wanted to be the person that everybody could understand and relate to. And sharing a wartime experience made me different, made me stand out, and I didn't want that. Bringing myself fully home allows me to share my story openly, honestly, and be okay with it. This is what Sandy does. She helps you bring that back, that piece of you that got left behind. If you resonated with today's episode, you can read Sandy's full story in the article she wrote in Health Over Wealth in the U.S. newsletter. The link is in the show notes. Health Over Wealth in the U.S., you have options.